Hi there, Phil the Practical Gardener again. This particular tip is on managing weeds. Now over the last weekend I had the privilege of travelling to a neighbouring province where I was able to view a number of beautiful show gardens, and they looked absolutely pristine, not a weed to be seen. To my mind that is actually quite a sterile environment. It doesn't have the same life, they're not returning the same organic matter, they're not bringing the same range of beneficial organisms such as birds and insects to their garden. On the other hand, sometimes I go to places who believe in wilding the garden, and the idea there is you let nature have its head. If you plant a fruit tree, you don't prune it, it will know what to do for itself. You leave the weeds, you leave the weeds in the garden because they will grow and provide protection for the plants. Now I'm sort of in between. I don't believe in either having a totally sterile environment, and I don't either believe in just leaving weeds to do their thing. If I have problem perennial weeds, I take them out before I do anything else. So that's the approach that I'm going to be bringing here, and I'm going to use this bed that I have beside me here as my example with these brassicas, and you can see that there are weeds growing here. I'm going to discuss them in a minute. Weeds are a very valuable asset in terms of the garden. So these plants that I have here, these speedwell and henbit and other weeds, and there are some peas coming up, are actually doing a really good job. They're encouraging beneficial insects such as pollinating bees and such like, and also parasitoid and predatory insect, bring them into my garden, helping to control pests. When I remove them, they will then add organic matter to the material. At the moment, they're not actually competing terribly much with the brassicas, but they will eventually. I'll slice them off at ground level, I'll leave the weeds lying as a mulch, and that will prevent further growth of new weeds and will act as a mulch in terms of protecting the soil surface and keeping it moist, and also adding organic material to the soil. So these weeds effectively and crop remnants are all that I return to the soil. I don't bring any fertilizer in. All the nutrients that the plant gets are through these forms of plant life. At the same time, it is true that you have to be aware of the old saying, 1 year's seeding, 7 years weeding. So when these ones seed, they will naturally come up. Now I'm not concerned about these particular ones here. I have quite a benign approach to them, but if there is a problem that I see as a problem one, I actually go through before I do my weeding session and I carefully remove them. This is generally perennial weeds, which would become quite a problem if I allow them to be. I'm going to discuss several techniques in order. First of all, mulching. Organic matter can be spread over the garden, as I've just discussed. This has various benefits, weed suppression among them. Mulch that is at least 50 millimeters or 2 inches deep is very effective at preventing operating or perennial weed seeds from emerging. Weed seeds will gradually drift onto the mulch or be dropped by birds. This will mean that the mulch becomes less effective over time unless it is replenished. Almost all established perennials will emerge through mulch without difficulty. That's why it's important to remove all perennial weeds before a garden is developed. Trying to remove underground rhizomes or taproots of perennials after mulch will greatly disrupt and compromise the effectiveness of the mulch. This area of buttercups that's on my friend's garden looks very pretty. However, if you were to decide to cultivate that as a garden, the buttercups would be a big problem. If it was me, I would actually cover the buttercups with heavy duty black plastic for about 3 or 4 months, which would kill almost all of those buttercups. Then I would put a fairly thick mulch over it, and some of the buttercups will actually revive and come through, but I would be able to easily remove them. That would be the easiest way of dealing with them. I would certainly eradicate them before I started to plant any vegetables or fruit trees or other beneficial plants. My personal approach to mulching is the chop and drop system, adding weeds, crop remnants, hedge trimmings and grass clippings to the layer. This keeps the ability of annual weeds to germinate and emerge to a minimum. Next, weed mat, or landscape fabric as it's sometimes called. This is usually a woven plastic material designed in theory to let moisture and air through, but to prevent weeds from emerging. However, this seldom works out in the long term. Bark, stones or other cover are usually spread over the weed mat for aesthetic reasons. Inevitably, organic matter from dust, decomposing leaves or the breakdown of the bark builds up on top of the weed mat and weeds become established in this. Furthermore, perennial weeds buried under the mat simply burrow to the nearest gap where a shrub has been planted or the edge of the mat and emerge at that point. They become extremely hard to eradicate, particularly if they are growing through a valued plant. Once laid, the weed mat becomes very hard to remove. Now, there are organic mats available, however these of course will decompose over time, so aren't a long-term solution. In this ornamental bed I have ornamental orchids, among which weeds could establish and become a problem for these small plants. I spread an organic mulch, in this case cardboard, and put bark chips over the top. I watch this particular bed very diligently. As soon as I see a weed emerging, I pull it out. In this way I am able to keep a fully weed-free environment for these small vulnerable plants. Next, weed killers or herbicides. I realise a lot of people have a poor attitude about them, and I'm comfortable with that. However, I think sometimes they are a useful backstop to consider. Sometimes I have a problem weed that really is best to be eradicated through the weed killer, after which I don't need to use it again. These can be very effective in controlling weeds in some situations. However, artificial weed killers are hard on the environment and on valued plants and are off balance for organic growers. Weeds often become resistant to herbicides, so they shouldn't be relied upon as a long-term approach. There are three forms of weed killer. Contract forms destroy any foliage they are sprayed onto. Some of these are organic materials, so are available to any gardener. They are only effective on annual weeds. They may burn off the tops of perennial weeds, but these will re-emerge as strongly as ever. The second type of herbicide is those that are translocated through the plant, systemic, and kill the perinating plants. They are effective on some perennial weeds, however many of these weed killers are selective, so you need to choose the correct one. These herbicides will certainly damage valued plants through spray drift. A safer alternative is to paint them onto the target weeds using a paintbrush. The third type of herbicide are residual ones, sprayed or spread onto the ground to prevent weed emergence. They are effective for a lengthy period, often about 6 months, so long as the soil isn't disturbed. Long-term use of pre-emergent herbicides damages soil health and can also enter the roots of valued plants, killing them. Cultivation. Now, I have covered this in my tip on tools for cultivating. I provide a link below. As an example, I will show you this area of annual weeds that I have on my brassica bed, which I mentioned before. They're certainly providing a valuable service in terms of bringing beneficial insects and protecting the soil. However, as the brassicas are coming on towards fruiting size, today I will actually hoe off these weeds and I will leave that on top as an organic mulch, which will prevent the emergence of further weeds and also protect the soil surface. A week ago I had a group of gardeners visit my garden, and they pointed at a few areas and said, goodness, there's a few weeds there, but I'm comfortable with that. I think we need to reconsider our attitude to weeds and consider them more as wildflowers to manage. When I was travelling around Europe recently, I noticed that a lot of the large public gardens are actually moving to an approach of more wilding the garden for areas such as lawns and garden areas, and this is pretty much the approach that I like to use. However, I do it in such a way that I am able to keep a manageable environment that still looks attractive and is very productive in terms of my fruit and vegetables. So I hope you found this tip useful. Don't forget to like it and subscribe if you haven't done so, and also share with others who you think might be interested in these topics. Also, of course, don't forget to put comments below. I'm very interested when I see them, and they also do help my channel to grow. I always look at them and I reply to them and actually learn things from them, so it is useful, I think, to both you and me if we have this dialogue. And of course, as always, thank you very much for watching this through to the end.